like, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but to a degree, it's who I am, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Terrence and I Terrence came across this paper written by this guy at the University of Toronto,
Mm-hmm.
I guess a couple of years ago or something like that, about the Christian prohibition against usury in the 13th century. And I've been thinking about the ways in which, like, we've just allowed, like, reactionaries to sort of retrofit this faith, which, I mean, of course, I mean, every faith's going to have, you know, some gnarly shit in it that's, you know, I think we all can agree we can cast aside.
Yeah.
But I think about that, the ways in which, like, like the right wingers have totally co-opted Christian. You know, it could have been Islam, it could have been you know, Judaism, if they're, you know, the bars to entry were a little lower in a way. Yeah. But Christianity seemed to fit the bill for what they needed to use it for, and so I've been thinking about that a bit more lately, and I don't know. I've been thinking about going to the Quaker meeting house.
Interesting. you know that's and I remember you guys talking about that a little bit. That's one of the few churches in my town. I was thinking about that possibility because, you know, primarily because I could walk to it. It's not the closest church, but the second closest house of worship to where I live now is actually a mosque. It's the only, like, mosque in the Rogue Valley in Oregon. Not really considering that.
Ahead and spread the fruit of Islam too. I thought about that too. So.
I don't know. For me, it's like a cultural thing. You know, I've gone to Jewish services because for a period my mother-in-law, you know, really gravitated towards that, and both kind of like more conservative and more liberal. And I don't know, I guess like the Christian stuff just culturally sort of like has more of a resonance to me because that's like the kind of thing that I was raised in. But yeah, if I could walk to it, that would really help. You know, if I didn't have to get in the car, pay what in my neck of the woods is getting mighty close to $5 a gallon for gas. Yeah, that would be a big incentive. But I don't know if that's enough to say to myself that, you know, Jesus Christ is the one Son of God. I don't think I could do that because my conception of religion...
He could be if gas prices go down, but that's for right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, that would help.
Gas is too high for him for me to recognize as dead.
Good transportation, public transportation that ran on a Sunday would help a whole lot. But at this point, I'm not doing it, and I would have to drive like 7-8 miles away to the nearest, like, you know, halfway decent, you know, progressive house of worship. And at this point, now that the kids are older, I'm just not willing to do that.
Right. Yeah. Well, you might check out the Quakers. I mean, from my understanding, and I guess everywhere's different. I'm not going to just paint with a broad brush, but it seems like by and large, they're anti-war, anti-racist, and sort of, you know, they don't really have ministers in the traditional sense. You know, it's silent worship, meditative worship, and you know, if the Spirit moves you to say something, you say something,
and they're high in fiber too.
That's true. And what I like most about them, what really drew me, well, I mean, all those things are great, but you know, instead of saying like, I'll pray for you, right? Like, you know, the school gets shot up and we just say thoughts and prayers. So like, you know, the gesture of prayer has sort of been cheapened in this country in a lot of ways.
Totally.
But I like the Quaker conception, which is I'll hold you in the light. There's something I like about that.
Have you been to a couple of services? And
I haven't yet. I plan to check it out. But I've been reading up, and also you don't even have to be a Christian to be a Quaker either. I mean,
really? Ooh,
you can. So
I like that.
That's another option. If you get there and you're like, okay, there's a certain religiosity I'm not attracted to. You just, you know, go to a non. I think they call it a non-theistic meeting house or something like that.
I may check that out. I may actually check that out because I tried the Unitarians, and the Unitarians are whatever. You don't even have to be believe in God to be Unitarian, which is cool. That's great. And then I tried a congregational church, which is, on the progressive end of things. And that was pretty cool. But I was always worried because they still talk about Jesus, which is fine because the group of people was nice. But I always wondered to myself, well, should I really be here? If I think that Jesus was a pretty cool guy, but I don't literally believe that he was the one Son of God sent to earth to die for our sins. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it would probably be cool with them, and they probably wouldn't care one way or another, but I always felt a little guilty about it. And now what you're saying about the Quakers gives me some interest, because maybe they, like, right up front, they've given me permission to, like, be okay with that, and maybe I can check that out. And I don't have to drive, so I could walk.
So that's handy.
And, reduce my risk of heart disease also because of their delicious oatmeal. Well, there you go. You see, it's healthy.
It's already good for your health.
Good for the body, good for the soul. I think there are a lot of different reasons. This is now a fascinating idea for me. But it's interesting, too, because, like, I walk through downtown, and it's Talent, Oregon. It's just a tiny little town. It wasn't much before, but we had a fire back in 2020, and we were living in next town down, like Phoenix, next town down I-5, which goes all the way up and down the West Coast, and the fire came through and burned about like 12 miles of houses. I mean, like in the main urban area, from the one end of Ashland through Talent, through Phoenix, and almost all the way to Medford. And while we were very lucky, our house did burn down that we lived in at the time. And we were actually, the time we were in Reading that I was talking about to you, we were at a hotel, trying to figure out a place to live. Now, the reason we got through that was for a couple of different reasons, because my daughter, who has disabilities, played in Hairspray in the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, because they had a youth ensemble who had disabilities that they incorporated into that performance. And so when the fire came through, burned 2,500 houses, including ours, they called us and said, hey, housing that we put up with the actors in, this is like, we're in the middle of COVID. Nobody's living there right now. Would you like to come live there until you can find another place? So we were incredibly lucky because of that. And then, like, we found another house, even though, like, God and everybody was, like, trying to find another place to live who had been burned out of the fire, because a guy who was leaving the Shakespeare Festival, a lighting guy, found a job someplace else and wanted to sell to somebody who had a connection to the festival, and that ended up being us because of our daughter. So we were extremely, extremely lucky. But that being said, 3 years later, there's still like pieces missing in downtown Talent, like that were burned out, that are just like weeded over lots, and there's still like hundreds of people who are living in temporary housing. Like we got FEMA trailers like a couple blocks from us. So it's frustrating to me that all this, the recovery happens so slowly. Yeah, I mean that probably happens to you, as a result of what you're seeing in eastern Kentucky too. I mean, from the way you guys were describing it, it was even worse.
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily think it's worse. I think it's just different, because.
Well, let's say that FEMA sucks just as bad, like in both places, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, that's not really geared to streamline a response to a crisis like it's supposed to. And I'm more sympathetic to what I'm talking about now. That I've always felt bad for people, like in the abstract. You know what I mean? But until it hits home for you, it's hard to really like get a conception of what kind of suffering people go through. And interestingly enough, a lot of the support we got when all that was going on was from people out west that had dealt with, again, like y'all, with wildfires and things, so different thing that came in and destroyed everything. But
Yeah.
it's hard to even. It's I was thinking about this earlier today. It's like it's weird how it's been over a year now, and like my life has been demarcated as before that and after that in a way.
Totally.
And
Totally. Yeah.
and so yeah, man, I totally know or I have an approximation. Obviously, I think I can't imagine what it'd be like to be in constant threat of wildfires. But,
Yeah. Even before the fire itself happened, it was getting more and more frequent, and it continues to get more frequent. Is like, and I hate to say it because the fire has devastated like people's lives, but in a way, psychologically, the smoke is even worse because like this is an area where there fires happen all over the place all the time. But like, if you got a good year in this valley, there'll be like 2 weeks during the second half of the summer that are just completely chock full of smoke. And it's a good thing you got those respirators from COVID because you need them in order to go outside. And it's like, to me, that's worse than being in the depths of winter, is to like be inside and looking out, and it just it depresses me no end to have that. It just I don't know, that gets to me. But they had a map, right? They were gonna they had the statewide map about like which block and like is most fire susceptible, and there was this huge controversy about we can't have that because the insurance companies are gonna mess with our rates and everything like that. So it's so sensitive a topic that you can't even really determine, like without getting a huge backlash, how much danger you're actually in, because the way that the insurance companies are likely to react. And you look what's happening in California. They're pulling like all their wildfire like coverage for houses away, which is like, okay, great, they're going to do that. So what's the logical thing to do is like get them out of the picture, like right. Have the state run it. But no, they won't do that because good old Gavin is so closely tied into him, and probably the people in charge of our state would be too. That
he's really just screwing the pooch.
Yeah, he pisses me off in a lot of different ways. He's not gonna. I have absolutely, you see, at least it's a good thing for me and my family, because when my dad and I talk, we can both hate on Gavin Newsom, but for different reasons,
Right, yeah. Find some commonality.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, it's so, obviously I don't know a ton about him, but it seems like he's sort of been running this weird shadow campaign in the event that like Biden were to become incapacitated, or incapacitated more to the degree that he couldn't do his his usual stuff, which is seems like a virtual certainty in the not too distant future.
That's something that I was going to bring up later, by the way, is Terrence's prediction. That scares the shit out of me, because for those of you who haven't listened, I'll give this away. Is Terrence's prediction is that, and I hope it does not happen, that come about a year from now, September, October of 2024, that we're going to wake up and we're going to have like deeply tragic headlines coming from the White House, and for one reason or another, President Biden's just going to have keeled over. And look, you can say that's never going to happen. What about Ruth Bader Ginsburg? That's exactly what happened. And he's in that same age range. For God's sake, I mean, the very least that we can do, the very least, is have him step aside for someone who's younger. I mean, it would be too much to get my hopes up that someone actually more to the left would take over. But God knows the powers that be wouldn't have that. But I swear, every time I think of that, it scares the shit out of me, because the more time I think about it, the more likely I think it is that Terrence's prediction is going to come true.
And then also, to Gavin Newsom, doing the classic